Hello everyone, Loremaster Sotek here, back to cover, of course, the new patch information, patch 1.1.0 for Total War Warhammer 3. Just wanted to make a video going over all of the patch changes, which I am super excited to talk about. And I hope the audio is okay. I am working on a new audio setup, so it should be better, but we've been having some minor issues, so if there's anything weird about it, I do ask for your forgiveness in advance. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the patch notes. So we have finally arrived at the first major patch for Total War Warhammer 3, which is a very, very exciting time, as this is going to fix many of the issues that the game has. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into all of it and see what we're looking at. So first, of course, that there has been further improvements to stability and performance, which is on top of the fixes that we already had in patch 0.6.4 or 0.4.6, one of those. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of the specific crashes. So they have finally fixed the crash where if you are alt-tabbing to another window, the game should no longer crash when it is not in focus, which is, of course, a pretty popular one. That's happened on a lot of the Total War games. So I remain a little dubious that it might be 100% fixed, because even Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 like to do that. But who knows, maybe they actually finally were able to put the silver bullet in that particular beast. Then they have fixed a crash where if you lost a caravan and... wow, that's very specific. If you lost a caravan, saved the following turn, and then tried to reload the file, it would cause a crash, which is very specific, but, you know, good thing they fixed it. Next, they fixed a crash when selecting a hero in an army and trying to move that army to merge with another. Once again, very specific, but a good fix. Fixed a crash when doing multiplayer campaigns. Oh, this one, okay, this one's actually really good. So if you were in a multiplayer campaign and a player tried to exit a match during another team's turn, it could cause a crash. That is no longer the case. That's really good. The more multiplayer crashes they could fix, the better, because those are always super annoying. But I've been playing a multiplayer campaign pretty much every other week lately, and I've noticed very, very few crashes, so that's really nice. Fixed a crash triggered when player queued movement command initiated a siege battle after ending the turn. I've definitely had that one, so that's a good fix. Crash when attacking a sieging army. That's definitely a popular one. Good to see it fixed. Fixed performance hits when dealing with Steam visual effects during custom battles. Fixed stuttering when vassalizing the legions of chaos as Slanesh. That's hilariously specific. Implemented several optimizations to distance and overdraw. Awesome. All good changes. All right, furthermore, they fixed the issues revolving around the vegetation, depending on your graphic settings. They've finished the flickering lines around a lot of the mountains. They fixed a visual issue when you would grab or try to select Kislev war sleds, and they've also fixed some issues to do with the background geometry and skyboxes in the realm of Tzeentch. Furthermore, the lead belchers and the iron blasters apparently have updated unit audio, which I'm really excited to try out. And there have been some slight fixes to the UI system. All right, now let's get into the really juicy stuff, which is, of course, all of the new mechanic fixes. So this one is a little minor, and then we get into some of the really, really big ones. So first, the corrupted traits that you get in Total War Warhammer 3 can now be removed in a better way. So it used to be so a corrupted trait is if you are in a region or province that has high corruption, for instance, Skaven corruption, and you're just hanging out there for too long, there is a good chance that your character is going to get a negative trait that essentially debuffs them because they've been infected by the corruption, so to speak. And I believe it used to be that the way you had to get rid of the corruption was, I think it was, you had to defeat an army that unleashed that corruption type or something along those lines. But they've made it a lot simpler and self-explanatory how to get rid of those traits. Now all you have to do is move to a province that has very low levels of that particular type of corruption. So for instance, let's say you're playing Scrag the Slaughterer, right? And he starts off next to a bunch of Skaven. So you pick up Skaven corruption on one of your characters. you could just move them back into your territory where presumably you have low Skaven corruption, or move them into just like Khornate territory where there's low Skaven corruption, and that trait will eventually go away, which is nice. That's a good, easy to understand fix. Moving on to some other stuff, they have repaired some issues with the tech line in the Slaanesh situation. So Slaanesh had some problems where if you had the Gift of Slaanesh upgrade and you got the Everlasting Gift technology, they could conflict and cause some problems. That has been repaired. This one is probably one of the most important, is that the supply line bug has been fixed. So now when you disband a lord that you no longer want, it does not count as being alive for the sake of supply lines. In the prior build, there was an issue where your supply lines would just never go down for disbanding that lord. So like your lords had to die in order for them not to count for supply lines. So that's a really, really nice fix. Beyond that, they fixed an issue with, this is also a really big issue that I'm really glad to see addressed, is that if units were dockable, so that's if you put a ranged unit against a siege wall, like on top of the wall, and there were certain areas in cities and minor settlements where you could also position them against something like a wall or a cliff or a fence, they had issues firing. So they wouldn't adjust the way they were shooting to shoot over it, so they would just stop shooting. So that has been fixed. Another issue, they fixed the situation where if you choose to give control of a reinforcing army to the AI, it would cause potentially some issues. That's been repaired. Heroes will now properly gain all their skill points even after rank 40. The Firemouth settlement has been fixed so that it no longer offers to build major settlement buildings when it's supposed to do minor settlement buildings. Units in ogre camps and hostile territory can replenish their armies properly. The Grisenwald Empire map, which is one I think I've actually fought on many times in my Scrag campaign, has been fixed, where the towers are no longer all completely blocking their line of sight because they were positioned in the middle of a bunch of buildings and they couldn't shoot or see over the buildings, so they just wouldn't shoot. So that seems to have been repaired. Also, mini-maps have had their deployment and Vanguard deployment zones redrawn so that they are better and don't have any issues anymore. Caravans, there's been a caravan bug that's been repaired, as far as if you lost a caravan, you would not be able to recruit a new one that turn. That's no longer the case. The auto-resolve has been tweaked when it comes to dealing with the AI, because currently there is a bug where if you attacked an enemy army in a settlement, you would get a better outcome in your auto-resolve than you would the enemy army attacking you from the settlement, which obviously that's not right. If you were attacking them in the city, they would have all the defenses of the city and their towers and barricades to help them out. So logically, they should stand a better chance. So that is a good fix. Fixed an issue with hero bus and recruitment rank buildings were failing to provide their bonuses. That's always good to have, because when you build those buildings to get all the buffs to your characters and new units you're recruiting, you obviously want those. They fixed an issue where you can no longer... there was a bug where you could trick the system into giving you infinite winds of magic due to a rounding error that has been fixed. And then Be'lakor has had his skill tree fixed a little bit, because he did have a really weird issue. And then they've also fixed a battle speed problem that resulted in slow motion being triggered automatically. As far as the prologue goes, there's been just a lot of bug fixes in the prologue. I'm not really going to focus or go over these, because the prologue, I think, is one of those things that you kind of play through once to get the story, and then you're probably not going to play it again unless they eventually were to do something more with that. I do think it is an experience absolutely worth playing, and everyone should play through it at least once. So I am very, very glad that they are fixing all of these issues. But I love the prologue, but I think it's very, very good that they're hopefully making it a lot better. All right, on to the Realm of Chaos, which this is probably the most important part of this entire patch. This is huge, because this was honestly the biggest issue with the game. So the Realm of Chaos patch has had the following changes introduced. Number one, first and foremost, the negative traits that you get from being in the Realms of Chaos has been reduced by roughly 50%. So for instance, if you went to the realm of Nurgle, you would get a buff that lowered your entire armies. You could get a negative trait that would lower your entire army's melee defense by a pretty ridiculous amount. On top of a couple of other things, those have all been cut in half. So I think that's really, really solid. Just because those traits are already so punishing, they were rather absurd in their level of punishment. Also, demon legendary lords will no longer be afflicted by negative traits when they are in the realm of their respective god. So we've arrived to the point where your god no longer hates you if you're playing a demon legendary lord. So Kugoth cannot get the Nurgle negative traits, Kairos cannot get the Kairos negative traits, and so on and so forth, which I think for immersion's sake is going to feel quite a bit better. This one is huge. If you gain negative traits in a realm of chaos, they will be removed immediately if you successfully complete the survival battle in that realm. So if you go into any of the gods' realms and you successfully defeat the Demon Prince fight, you will immediately lose all those negative traits, which is so nice. That is such a nice little bonus to beating the Demon Prince, because that means that if you win, you get to go home and just immediately start sending your character around to start doing stuff again. You don't have to retreat into like a settlement and wait for, you know, a bunch of turns for the trait to hopefully go away and then, you know, start moving around again. That just gives a really nice incentive to winning that fight. Next, this one is also a massive change, and I think is going to make so many people happy. If the AI beats you to getting 4 Demon Prince souls, so the AI has the ability to go to the Forge of Souls and win the campaign before you. So the way it used to work is that they had a 15-turn timer where you I think it was a 5-turn timer. I don't remember how long it was, but you had this timer where you basically had to be constantly watching the Forge of Souls, and if the AI attacked it, you had to immediately respond and kill them, and it would buy you a 15-turn timer before they would try again, which just isn't really long enough to do anything, because you would have to you'd have to time that between, because that means you would have to beat them and then try to get into another chaos realm and beat that chaos realm, get home and heal up and go fight the AI again, all within 15 turns. Because if you didn't, then they would just skip to the end and beat you, and it was ridiculous. Now it is considerably more punishing, which is that if the AI beats you to the end and you teleport to the Forge of Souls, you wait for them to show up, they show up and you fight them. If you beat them, they now lose all of their Demon Prince souls. So basically the souls are freed from them and they have to do it all over again. So if Katarine beats you to the 4 souls, you can then just beat her once and then focus purely on other stuff. And I think this is particularly great for people who don't want to deal with that part of the campaign. If people just want to paint the map and treat it like Mortal Empires, essentially, they're like, you know what? I don't even want to worry about the Realm of Chaos. I don't even want to deal with it. I just want to focus on painting the map and killing everybody and taking over the world. This is perfect because it just means that every once in a while, if one of those factions gets 4 souls, you just go to the Forge of Souls for a little bit, punch them in the face, and then they have to start all over. And the thing that's really nice about that is if you are not like trying to finish the campaign, Chaos Rifts are only going to spawn every like 25 to, or no, I think it's every like 50-ish turns. So like it would be very, very easy to prevent the AI from winning through Demon Prince souls, which I think is a really good change for people who are trying to beat the campaign, but you know the AI just manages to get ahead of them, and people who are just trying to paint the map and don't want to deal with that. I think for both sides, that's awesome. And then this is probably the most important change in the entire patch, which is that the protection chain of buildings, which the protection chain are the torch buildings that make it easier to detect Skaven undercities, lower corruption penalties, and also make diseases have a much harder time of spreading. Now they have an additional effect where they will prevent Chaos Rifts from spawning in that province. So you pick one of your buildings in your province or one of your regions, you build a single protection building, and the entire province is now immune to Chaos Rifts, which I think is such a huge deal. That is so massive, because now you could just pick a province and say, okay, this province doesn't have to deal with chaos rifts anymore. I don't have to deal with that massive increase in corruption. I don't have to deal with enemy agents spawning there, and I don't have to deal with armies spawning there. And what's nice is because it's on a province by province basis, you could say, oh, okay, you know what? I'm playing Kislev, right? So I want to make it where all of my provinces that have a minor city cannot get chaos risks because I just don't want to deal with that. So I'll build at least one of these buildings in every one of those provinces. But Kislev City, the capital of my empire, if I'm trying to beat the campaign, I do want a Chaos Rift to open there because that would give me easy access to the Realm of Chaos. I know vaguely where that portal's going to be, and my Legendary Lord can be immediately ready to jump into it and teleport so that I can win the campaign. So you can kind of control where those rifts are going to show up. If you just don't want to deal with any rifts, you just make sure you build one of those in every province. Or you could be like, okay, I know this province can handle chaos rifts because like there's only a single city here, or all of the cities here are very heavily reinforced. But this will actually allow you to not have to worry about, like, if you have a province that's very well protected, like say you're playing Scrag, right? And let's say you control all of the Grey Mountains. Once you've moved kind of out of the Grey Mountains, you don't have to deal with them anymore. You could make it where none of the Grey Mountain settlements have any defensive structures other than one settlement in each of those provinces has that building. That way you can make them all economic based, for instance. So they're just pumping out money and you don't have to worry about some random ass demon army popping up and invading. So I think that's a really, really great change. Furthermore, this is also another great change, is that survival battles have been notably adjusted so that they actually give you a reward for winning. So on top of getting rid of all the negative traits that you would have accrued from being in that demonic realm, they also now give you a buff for 10 turns. And the buff gives you an increase of 5 of whatever the winning faction's corruption is to all provinces, which is fantastic. So if you're playing Nurgle, that means 5 Nurgle corruption for everyone. If you're playing Kislev, that means 5 unaligned, so like no corruption, anti-corruption for everyone. If you're playing, the Demon Prince, 5 Chaos Undivided corruption for everyone, etc. So that's a fantastic change. And then plus 8 control to all your provinces, plus 15 growth, and plus 10% income. Those are great. Like, it's not like you're gonna be God all of a sudden, but it's just a really nice bonus to help your empire gain a really solid advantage for a bit, especially on higher difficulties. Because all 3 of these are great. Like 15 growth, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's really, really solid, especially because you're getting it everywhere. 8 control is very, very nice, and that 10% income is nothing to sneeze at. Some other changes, I don't think these alone are enough just yet, but this is going the right direction. So Tzeentch's Realm, the points of interest. So points of interest are the big white glowy circles that every single realm has. Except for, I don't think Slaanesh technically has them, because Slaanesh you just move into the portals. But Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzeentch all have these like white circles. So for Nurgle's, a point of interest is when is like in the 4 corners. Tzeentch's is most of the islands have a point of interest, and then Khorne, it's also the corners. So for Tzeentch, you would go to them and they would provide you a dilemma, and the dilemma was they would either heal you to full health, your whole army, give you a random boon that you could not, you didn't know what it did, or they could reveal a portal. They could reveal 2 portals. So they would be like, hey, if you go through this portal, it guarantee will lead you to this one, which was all right. So honestly, those choices all were kind of great. So now they fixed it where now it just automatically heals you all the way to full. So you don't have to, you no longer have to pick the healing. You just get healing no matter what. I don't know if that's you heal to full no matter what, or maybe it's you heal a good bit, and then maybe one of them is like you heal to full instead of just healing a lot. I'm hoping it's just it heals you all the way to full, and now it's just you can either have the boon of Tzeentch or you can know what 2 of the portals are. And the other thing that's really nice is they've made it where the dilemma, the boon of Tzeentch now tells you what it is. So when you open the dilemma, it's not going to be like, do you want this random boon? And you're like, I don't know, do I? Now it'll just tell you what the boon is, and you can be like, oh, that's pretty good for my army, I'll take that, or oh, that's trash, I'd rather like know where these portals lead me, or whatever. All right, for Nurgle, I still think Nurgle's is a little not great. My review, I know it's late for Total War Warhammer 3. It's finished recording, it's in editing, but it is very long. So I feel for my editor, and thankfully most of it is still relevant even with this patch. Very few things I talk about I think are going to be out of date with this patch, because I knew this patch was coming, so I was able to kind of talk around that. But so for Nurgle's realm, when you go to his points of interest, what it currently does is it provides you mitigation against attrition damage while you are in Nurgle's realm. That's what it currently does. So, for instance, it's like you have 50% less damage taken from attrition. Now what it is it's still the exact same buff, but it lasts for just a flat 20 turns no matter where you go, instead of only lasting while you are in Nurgle's realm. So you can take it with you out of Nurgle's realm, so you are much more resistant to attrition damage for a while. I still don't think that's a big enough buff compared to like the super weapons for Khorne, the crazy bonuses Slaanesh will offer you, even though Slaanesh does kick you out, so like there's a little bit more of give there because it comes at a price. And I don't know what Siege's boons do because I've never actually taken them, so I'm curious to see what those are. I've talked about this in my review, but I still think what Nurgle should do is when you go to those dilemma or those points of interest, I still think it should offer you a dilemma where you can choose to be infected with a disease that like has a whole bunch of buffs but comes at a debuff. I think that would be really, really cool. And then, it lasts for however many amount of turns. Anyway, so this is a bug that's a really good fix because I actually had this bug, which is that flying units can no longer get on top of the Nurgle islands that are in the skybox. I didn't know this was a thing, but this actually happened to me last night in a stream where I sent some of my Furies when I was fighting in the realm of I was fighting in a Nurgle map, and they triggered one of these islands, so they ended up just flying up and up and up and up, and they went into outer space, and I didn't see them until the end of the battle, which was kind of hilarious. And then they fixed a couple of just little bugs. Be'lakor, here's another change I am really, really fond of. I think Be'lakor is not well implemented in the game right now. I think that taking him as a lord at the end is stupid unless you're like playing the Legions of Chaos. I think that's the only army where it feels vaguely appropriate. Especially, but like at the same time, every single legendary lord is literally fighting him the whole campaign. It feels really weird to hire the big bad who's also known for being a treacherous snake. I would not trust that guy leading my armies. But in any event, they have now made it a dilemma. So when you defeat Be'lakor in the final battle, instead of just you get Be'lakor as a lord and you're like, oh great, now I've got to deal with like having another army that I didn't want to deal with a lord who's okay but not like amazing. So what they've done now is you can now choose to banish Be'lakor. So you'll get a dilemma where you can either enslave Be'lakor and take him on as a pseudo legendary lord, or you can banish him and get these buffs. And the buffs are permanent for the rest of your campaign, and it's +3 hero capacity for all hero types, +14 recruit rank for all lords and heroes, +5 winds of magic per turn for all armies, +7 control for all provinces, +25 growth for all provinces, and +15% additional income for all provinces. That is amazing. Honestly, I don't know why anyone would ever pick Be'lakor unless they just really, really like Be'lakor. I cannot imagine why anyone would take him otherwise. So I think this is a fantastic change. And I think this is really, really awesome for all the armies to which taking Be'lakor felt really inappropriate. Like, if I'm playing pretty much anyone, if I'm playing ogres, Cathay or Kislev, I would never ever take Be'lakor because for me that just doesn't feel right. I don't want to have a demon running around my army unless it's like an allied unit that I earned by being allies, so I really, really like that I can just banish him instead and get super sexy buffs, because that will actually incentivize me to keep playing the campaign. I think that conquering it, especially if you are someone that wants to conquer the world, I actually think this now incentivizes you to still do the Chaos Rift campaign and actually like finish the Realm of Chaos, because it's so nice that now you can get this super powerful buff to just make your armies way better. They also fixed issue with Be'lakor where his starting trait was not doing what it was supposed to be doing, and then they fixed like a little audio issue. All right, on to some pretty serious changes to the Demon Prince faction. So the Demons of Chaos Undivided are a very cool faction, though I think that a lot of its coolness was unfortunately due to its novelty and not due to what it was capable of. Because the faction, in my opinion, really lost a lot of its luster very quickly out of the game after the game came out. And I talk about this quite a bit in my review, but I feel the faction is very weak. And there have been a lot of changes in here to try and address that weakness, especially to the Demon Prince himself. I still don't think that this is enough in and of itself to fix the faction. I would personally really like them to get a tech tree, and I also think that the Demon Prince should get access to magic items, because I just don't think he's that strong. And I think even with a lot of these changes, I really don't feel that he's going to be super crazy strong, because he feels like one of those characters where you kind of have to like very carefully optimize your build to make him strong. And even then, that might not necessarily do it. Whereas if you gave him access to magic items and you also gave the faction a tech tree, even if it was like a fairly small and simple tech tree, I think it would help so much to balance out the faction and not make it as punishing. Because I feel right now it is very punishing unless you're very meticulous about how you plan out designing the character, and how you're going to like buff your faction. So anyway, let's go ahead and break it down. So first and foremost, most of his a lot of his stats have essentially been doubled. So his melee attack, so these are his base stats. So with no starting equipment, or like body parts, so to speak, he now has access to 50 melee attack instead of 25, 45 melee defense instead of 20, 225 base damage instead of 200, 225 AP instead of 200. He has 20 starting armor instead of 10, and a 40 charge bonus instead of 30. So that's great. Just flat stat buff across the board. And it's going to make him way better, especially at dueling other characters and like fighting them. One thing that I noticed when I was playing the Demons of Chaos Undivided with the Godslayer is that he felt grossly underwhelming when it came to his melee attack and melee defense. Like, it just felt like his melee attack and melee defense were awful. You know, compared to like Total War Warhammer 2 characters, where you could very reliably typically get them like in the upper 80s and 90s, you know, by the end of their skill trees. You could not do that with the Demon Prince, at least not without a lot of struggle. However, to compensate that, they have debuffed his starting equipment, just because his starting equipment used to actually be fairly decent. All of it has been debuffed, except for the weapons, funny enough, just to try and bring him a little bit more in line with other starting characters and to make him feel appropriate. So his starting torso, left arm, right arm, legs, and tail have all been debuffed a little bit. Funny enough, his head did not get debuffed. And then his starting weapons have actually had their damage increased a bit. All right, so from there, we talk about his progression offerings. So the thing I don't necessarily like about the Demons of Chaos faction is that all of their buffs purely revolve around the Demon Prince character, which I don't think is necessarily a great thing and is something that should change in the future, especially because I would really like to see Be'lakor join this faction in Immortal Empires as its second legendary lord. But these changes are great. I just hope they consider doing a tech tree, because I don't know. I just don't like the idea that, like, if I want to run a army of mixed demons, it feels much more difficult than it should, because all of my buffs are tied to how many offerings I dedicate to a specific god, which that's fine. Like, I think offering to a specific god should, of course, make that part of your faction more powerful, but it'd be nice if there was also a tech tree on top of that, where I could say, oh, okay, well, even though I'm going undivided, like, I really want to have this particular Khornate unit, so maybe I could use my tech tree to buff my Khorne units a little bit to make them, you know, better. And just stuff like that would be nice. But anyway, so the big change, the first one I want to point out is that they have greatly improved the offering number 8. So offering number 8 for every single god has been notably buffed or at least altered a little bit. So the first thing they did is that they've made it where no matter which god it is, all of the gods at level 8 gave you a recruitment bonus to your lords and heroes. It used to be +3, which is super lame. That is so bad. It's not even funny. And there really wasn't much you could do to get it above a +3. So now it is +10, which is significantly stronger and feels so much better. Getting a new lord starting at level 11 is much nicer than getting a new lord starting at level 4, especially if you're trying to get exalted greater demons in your faction, even in the late game. Furthermore, for offering 9, they've also made it where any new units that you recruit, instead of starting off at rank 4, they will now start off at rank 7, which is a massive buff. So all of your god-specific units, so like if you get to Khorne rank 9, all of your Khornate units will start off at gold chevrons instead of silver chevrons, which very, very nice change. Granted, that's offering 9, so that's pretty far down the offering tree. And then, in addition, for offering 8, they've changed how a lot of them do, I think, to make them feel a lot more unique. So for Khorne, they got rid of his casualty replenishment bonus, but he now gives you a 25% movement buff to your campaign movement whenever any of your armies wins a fight. That's great. Nurgle has gotten rid of building cost reduction bonus, but has gained 20% global replenishment bonus to all Nurgle units. That feels thematic and pretty nice. Slaanesh did not lose anything, but his diplomacy bonus for all factions went from +10 to +25. That's awesome. +10 is not enough to do anything. I think +10 tends to be weaker than like the base bonus just for being demons, or worse than like your great power bonus or debuff. So +25 feels much more significant and like, oh, this could actually help me get some alliances and trades of some sort. And then Tzeentch offering, they've gotten rid of the increase to the strength of the Winds of Magic, and instead have made it where when you pick up the Strengthening Winds of Magic skill, it is increased from 10% to 25%. I think, that's fine. All right, moving on to the gift sets. So there are multiple sets that exist in the Demon Prince. He actually has the most sets out of anybody in the game, obviously because he has the most items, and they're all curtailed specifically to him. So a number of these have just had new bonuses added or slight alterations made. So for the Armored Prince of Chaos, if you take the Armored Prince of Chaos set, it gives you the Mortal Blow ability, which it used to not. And instead of giving you an additional 10% glory, it now increases your leadership aura size from 25% to 50% bigger, which is pretty notable, actually. So it gives you Mortal Blow and that instead of the glory increase, which I think is totally fine, because glory increase of 10%, I don't think that's anything to cry over. The Scorched Prince of Chaos does the exact same thing. They got rid of the glory bonus, but it gives you the Mortal Blow active ability. And then the Adorned Prince of Slaanesh set was debuffed a little bit, where instead of giving you +4 recruitment rank to Slaanesh units, it does +3. But I think that actually lines up nicer with the offering to the gods, because that means that your units would have been coming in at 10, which doesn't make sense. Now it would come in at 9, which actually makes sense. You can get max rank Slaanesh units if you combo those. Moving on, the Demonic Prince gifts. They have fixed a bug where some of the Tzeentch items had overlapping spells, and they have this is super nice. So the Demon Prince can actually be a good wizard now, because originally the Demon Prince only could get access to minor spells, not Overcast. So every spell you got, you could only cast the minor version. So your character never felt like he was a good wizard. He felt like he was putting a single skill point in on every single spell instead of instead of multiple skill points, or being like a lord, where lords, if they put a single skill point into a spell, they get, the base version and the Overcast version. So that's been fixed. That's a great fix. And then there are just so many buffs to almost every single item piece in the game. Granted, it's all just numbers. It's none of these are new abilities. They basically have just gone to almost every single piece, not every single piece, but most of the pieces, and have given them roughly 30 to 50% bonuses. Except for in like certain cases where like the Great Axe of Rage got like all the Great Axes got like massive buffs. But I'm not going to go over all these just because there's a ton of them and it's kind of just meaningless unless you're actually like playing and looking at it. But hopefully this will make the Demon Prince character much more competitive in the sense of like how powerful he feels compared to your other lords and the other legendary lords in the game. I will say that I don't think this is going to make the Legions of Chaos faction immediately great. I still think that CA went a little too hard into making it all about the Godslayer. I still would like to see him get access to at least, like, okay, I get that the dude basically has built-in weapons, so maybe he doesn't need access to, like, a magic weapon, but I still think it would be worth it to give him access to, like, an arcane item, magic armor, enchanted item, and a talisman. Like, I and like have the ability to equip banners and followers and stuff. I still think that would be worth doing, which he does not currently do. And of course, I still think a tech tree is a non-negotiable. General fixes. So they fixed an issue where Boris will properly appear. Great. Once you complete the Frozen Falls quest battle in a campaign. I do still really wish they'd find a way to get Boris to show up in the game as AI once you have unlocked him, in the sense that once I have unlocked Boris, he just shows up in all of my future campaigns. Right now, he only shows up if you are playing as him, or if you play as a Kislevite faction, and then you complete the Frozen Fall quest, and then you have to choose to make him an AI faction. I do really wish he would just appear on his own somehow in the game. But, beggars can't be choosers. Anyway, this one is huge, though. They have now fixed an issue where narrative events would continue to trigger after you've beaten the campaign. That will no longer happen. So if you beat the campaign, Chaos Rifts will no longer open. So once you've beaten the campaign, the Chaos Rifts that are still there will remain until something closes them. But once they are closed, all the Chaos Rifts are gone forever. So you don't have to worry about, because the way it worked in the old patch is that once you got to the last Demon Prince soul, once you beat the last Demon Prince soul, all the Chaos Rifts were just permanent. Like, they would just stay open forever. And even if you close them, they would just reopen. So it kind of made the campaign unplayable after that. So that has been fixed and is no longer the case, which is going to be really good for people that want to keep playing the campaign. I think that's a great fix. That's awesome. All right, moving on to battle changes. Most of this is, some of this is single player focused, and then there's of course some big multiplayer stuff, which I've already been watching some multiplayer tournaments, and they all seem very excited about the changes. So that's great. First and foremost is that they have fixed Penumbral Pendulum. Penumbral Pendulum is no longer stupidly overpowered, which is that you can see here that its values have been grossly reduced because that spell was so overperforming it wasn't even funny. So the base damage for the regular form was cut in half, and then in its overcast version, the armor piercing damage has been also cut significantly. So it no longer deals 108 armor piercing damage, or 108 damage, but now 45. So that's great. So the damage values on both the overcast version and the regular version were brought down significantly, which is fantastic. Also, some changes to the way units perform in the game, which I think is fantastic, is that number one, infantry units now have their behavior much closer to the way they responded in Total War Warhammer 2. So there was an issue where if you clicked on a unit and you told them to change direction, for instance, like you were like, hey, turn around and fight this enemy, they would, in the old games, they would immediately turn and move. Like they would do it as one fluid motion. In this game, when you would tell an infantry unit to change direction or something, the unit would like, or even just told them to attack. If they were standing still, they would pause, turn, finish turning, and then move. So it took them significantly longer to respond to orders, which was very frustrating for literally everyone. So that has been fixed, which is fantastic. They have fixed a bug where ranged units that were docked on siege walls or any kind of structure had their rate of fire reduced. So not only were many of them not drawing line of sight, but so they just wouldn't shoot at all, but even if they were shooting, they had a slower rate of fire. Both of those have been fixed, so fantastic. They've also fixed a bug which would cause ranged units to reset their animations without having fired. So basically you would see a unit like attempting to shoot and it wouldn't, and then it would reset and then attempt to shoot and it wouldn't and reset, and it would just keep doing that, so it wouldn't do anything. That has been fixed, so the units now should be fluidly like shooting and, you know, doing all that stuff. And then they fixed another bug, which I actually did not know about until I read the patch notes, which is that if you told a locked control group to charge or to attack, it would actually automatically kind of essentially enter them into guard mode. That will no longer happen. So that's great. They do note here, I do want to point this out specifically, they do make some notes that they are working on solving future issues that did not get addressed in this, just because they only have so much time before they have to, the patch has to go live. And so there are a couple of changes that did not make it into this patch, but will be showing up in future patches. The three big ones that they point out that they're like, hey, we know these are problems and we're working on them, they're just not in this particular patch, are the responsiveness of airborne units transitioning to the ground. So like if you have like a unit of flyers and you tell them, hey, land on the ground, sometimes it could be a little funky. They're working on that. They're also working on how units disengage from combat. So if you tell a unit, like a unit's in combat and you're like, hey, fall back, they can kind of trickle away from the combat instead of like moving away immediately. That's being looked at. And of course, knockdown behavior, which there are quite a few issues involving knockdowns. So I'm glad that's being looked at, though there are actually some fixes regarding knockdowns in this. Then this one is huge, which is that the charge reflection ability has finally been fixed. So charge reflection in the old build it worked always. So if you had a unit of halberds, so they had the charge reflection attribute, the way it was supposed to work is that if the unit was braced and they were charged from the front, they could automatically deal damage through the charge reflection trait back onto the attacker, which would represent them like impaling people as they're charging. The way, unfortunately, that it was actually working is that those units were dealing the charge reflection in pretty much every single circumstance. So if you were charging a unit of halberds and the halberds countercharged you, so you were both charging each other, they would still get their charge reflection, which didn't make any goddamn sense, and it made halberds and spears vastly overperform in a number of circumstances. So that's really good to see those fixes implemented. Another issue involving knockback and damage calculations is that a defending unit would use the attacker's mass rather than their own for impact damage calculations. So for instance, if you had a unit of Mournfang cavalry for your Ogre Kingdoms and you charged a unit of peasant spearmen from Cathay, the game would tell the peasant spearmen that as they instead of the Mournfang cavalry's mass being calculated against the spearman's mass to determine damage, it was calculating the Mournfang's mass against the Mournfang's mass. So that was really, really shitty for big units who were not having a good time with that. So I'm glad that's been fixed. Fixed an issue where attacker reinforcements would enter from within the defender city. Good. Obviously, that's bad. So good change. Good change. Army reinforcements should now correctly enter the battle according to their position on the campaign map relative to the battle. That's awesome. But of course, you could still change where a unit is reinforcing from because you can click and drag. The more you move it, obviously, the longer they take as they have to reposition outside of the battlefield and then charge in from where you told them to. But that's good. And then in domination survival battles, they have fixed an exploit that people were using, where they would summon units using like a cultist. They would summon a unit and then recall the summoned unit to get a refund on points. So they were basically cheesing the game, and that is no longer allowed. They have fixed that. General fixes. Exalted Lords of Change now have access to greater arcane conduit. Great. Iron blasters are now less accurate. So their projectiles spread much further, and they also deal less damage, both base damage and armor piercing damage. So they are now significantly less good at sniping, but are more of like a giant shotgun, which I think is a good change. I think that's a good change. Gorgers have been significantly debuffed, which is great because Gorgers, I think we can all agree, were grossly overperforming. So they have had their armor piercing damage cut down from 70 to 50. Also, there are less Gorgers per unit. So their unit size has been reduced by roughly 25%. And then this bug, which was a personal bitch of mine that I'm really, really glad they were able to get fixed for me/us, is that Fire Belly heroes now properly receive their spells if they are in a garrison. So if you played the old patch, Ogre garrisons just didn't have spells. Now they do, which is great. And then multiplayer changes for Ogres. Ogre Giants now count as a rare single entity for unit caps, and Iron Blasters are significantly more expensive on top of their debuffs. So they've gone from 1,400 gold apiece to 1,750 gold apiece. I don't think that's going to drag the Ogres from being probably one of the best multiplayer factions, but that certainly is going to make them have to use more variety in their builds. Next, some pretty cool changes for Grand Cathay. So this applies to single player and multiplayer. The range of Harmony has been increased from 45 meters to 60 meters. That's fantastic. That's great. That means you have a lot more leeway when deploying your units and maneuvering your units to still be in Harmony distance without having to be like super duper on top of each other. So that's a really, really solid increase there. That's another third of your original radius added. Also, the Sky Junk has 5 more ammunition on its big missiles, and the Sky Junk bomb ability now has a 30-second cooldown instead of a 60-second cooldown, which I think is fantastic. I have no idea why the Sky Junk had a 60-second cooldown on dropping bombs. That was ridiculous. 30 seconds feels much more reasonable. The Sky Lantern actually does something now. So the Sky Lantern is a little bit faster at 5 additional speed, but hey, that's an increase of what? Oh god, math. 5% faster? No, maybe. I don't know. No, it's not 5%. It's much higher than 5%. Whatever. I'm moving on. 1/6. There we go. No, 1/5. Whatever. Okay, I'm moving on. Shield Breaker has now been added. That's fantastic. So the Sky Lantern's now the Sky Lantern's the smaller one. So the ladies with the guns, when they're pew-pewing at people, if they hit someone, it applies the Shield Breaker effect, which greatly reduces their missile block chance with shields. So that is fantastic. It's not necessarily great against every army. For instance, demons have very, very few units with shields. But that's going to be amazing, especially once we get Immortal Empires and all of the armies come in. I think that's going to be a really, really nice change. But I'm curious to see if this is going to make the Sky Lanterns a little more viable. It is worth noting that this will also buff the version with the Lord Magistrate. So if you take a Lord Magistrate general and you put him on a Sky Lantern, he should have the Shield Breaker effect as well. Against armies that there's going to be a lot of shielded infantry and they're kind of relying on that to try and block your crossbow fire and your guns and stuff, it's just going to be a really nice bonus to have on top of everything else you're doing. And then affixed to the skill tree, all of the Cathayan generals had a skill called Stone Gaze, which was in the red tree, and it used to provide a leadership bonus to Terracotta Sentinels and Whooshing War Compasses, which is obviously not good because Terracotta Sentinels are unbreakable, so they don't need leadership, and Whooshing War Compasses aren't really combat units. So they now get bonus armor instead of bonus leadership, so that's great. Moving on to multiplayer, there's been some cost reductions. So the Whooshing War Compass is now only 800 gold instead of 1100. And if you take an Astromancer on a Whooshing War Compass, instead of it costing 950 gold to put him on a Whooshing War Compass, it now only costs 400 gold, which I think is a really solid change, and hopefully we'll see more of these units in multiplayer. And then last but not least, Peasant Archers got a slight cost reduction from 450 to 400, which I think is great. All right, Tzeentch. Tzeentch was grossly overpowered, and they have been slapped with the nerf hammer, I think, very appropriately. I don't know if this is going to be enough of a nerf. I think their shooting might still be a little overpowered, but these are some really, really nice changes to make Tzeentch trading with the enemy less effective. So the biggest change is that the recharge delay for the barriers is now 30 seconds instead of 15 seconds. So that is twice as long for the barriers to recharge. So what that means is when a Tzeentch unit takes damage, it basically starts a timer that they have to be out of combat for that long, and then their barrier will recharge back to full. It used to be only 15 seconds. So like if you, let's say you like shot a unit of Tzeentch demons with like a cannon or something, and they took, they lost like 90% of their barrier, you would only have 15 seconds before that would go all the way back to full. That is not a lot of time. Especially because it would, the recharge timer, if I remember correctly, only resets if the unit is engaged in melee. So like you would shoot it with a cannon, and then 15 seconds later, it's going to get its barrier back no matter what. Now it is a 30-second timer, which is significantly more leeway time, and also is going to be much easier to kind of hit and run on Tzeentch to prevent its barriers from recharging, if that's a strategy you want to try and use. So for instance, you're playing one of the, like, let's say you're playing Nurgle, right? If you take out the barrier on a Tzeentch unit, you can literally kind of hit and run with like a unit of Furies, for instance, to make it so that their barrier doesn't start recharging. But you have like a 30-second timer instead of 15 seconds, which is just much more generous. Arcane Surge. So the Arcane Surge ability has been fixed on top of the changes we spoke about earlier, so that Tzeentch no longer has the ability to get infinite winds of magic. That was an exploit that I know Legend of Total War found, and that definitely did not feel intended. Like, if you want infinite winds of magic, you need to go into the Realm of Chaos. There you have infinite magic, but you should not have that on a regular fight, especially because the Blue Fire Tzeentch could be such a devastating spell. Infinite magic was just way too much. So on top of the changes they made that we spoke about earlier, they've also made it where the Arcane Surge army ability that Tzeentch can have has been cut in half. So instead of it generating or refilling your reserves by 0.3 every second, so it would take roughly 3 to 4 seconds to get a full point of Winds of Magic back, or added to your reserve. Now it's 0.15. So it takes, roughly 7 to 8 seconds to get a full Wind of Magic point in your reserve. So that's a really good change. The Warp Flame passive has also been debuffed. It now, instead of it reducing your armor by 15, it reduces it only by 10. And the weakness to fire debuff has been reduced from 11% to 10%. I don't know if that's going to be enough, but that, especially for armor, that's a fairly significant debuff. It'll be interesting to see how Tzeentch is performing with these changes. Forsaken of Tzeentch have been debuffed. They no longer have magic resistance. Great. I honestly don't know why they had magic resistance in the first place. Magic resistance is not something that comes to mind when I think Tzeentch, so I don't know why they decided to go that way with them, but it's gone now, so whatever, who cares. The Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch has had its base ammunition increased from 10 to 15 to make it have more shots, and also its range has been increased from 90 to 150. So the Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch has been buffed a fair bit. This was mostly done, as they say up here, to make it where it is much more different than the regular Flamers of Tzeentch. Currently, the Exalted Flamer was just a worse version of the Flamers because it was one guy versus like 9, and they had pretty much the exact same stats. Like, I think he did more damage, but he had like the same range and some other stuff. So now he has a significantly longer range and he has more ammunition. However, because of that, he also costs more money. All right, moving on to Kislev. Kislev has received some buffs with one notable exception. So the big thing is that the heavier Kislev units have been made so that they are much better at responding to orders, and being able to like adjust and move according to the orders you give them. So all armored Kossars, Thrautsi, and Zargard have had their unit acceleration increased by 10. So that is another 50% increase, which makes them much faster to go from standing still to moving, or like notable direction changes. The light war sleds were grossly overperforming, so they have been debuffed rather heavily. So they've lost 20 armor, so they are now properly light war sleds instead of, like tactical light war sleds with heavy Kevlar. So they're much less armored, so they're going to be much more vulnerable to non-armor piercing damage. The Elemental Bear has actually been buffed, which I think is pretty good, which is it's gotten a lot more melee defense, so now it has a base of 30 instead of 20, and then Little Grom got a good damage buff to make it more viable, which I think is pretty solid, because it just wasn't super great. So it has more damage and AP damage. In addition, the White War Swed, on top of having its armor penalized, has also been increased in cost. So it is now 1,100 gold per Light War Sled unit instead of 950, which will make it more difficult to spam. And I think that's a great change, because I've watched multiplayer tournaments, and I've literally seen Kislev players winning by just taking almost pure Light War Sled armies. So hopefully this should help punish that strategy quite a bit. And then the Elemental Bear has had a slight cost reduction. So on top of getting more melee defense, it's also cheaper to take. So hopefully that will incentivize people to use it. Nurgle, some pretty cool changes for Nurgle. They're not massive, but I do think they will help. So the first thing is that all Plague Bearer units have had a moderate increase to their speed. They all now have a base speed of 27 instead of 23. That's not massive by any means, but hey, that will help, genuinely. So they're a little bit faster than they were. Also, all of the units that have death heads have had the amount of ammunition they carry increase. So the Exalted Plague Bearers now have 3 full volleys instead of 2 full volleys, and the Plague Drones of Nurgle with death heads, which I actually think is pretty nice, now have 10 volleys instead of 7. So your shooting units can actually get off a good number of volleys now, which is just going to increase their damage by quite a bit, because they, I think, are much... the death heads really, really hurt. They just don't have a lot of range and don't have a lot of ammo. So hopefully these will help these units really get their value. And then Kugoth Plaguefather has received some moderate buffs to try and make him a bit more viable. First is that in his base ammunition count has been increased from 22 to 35, which I think, like, if you... I'd have to go double check, but I think in campaign, if you, like, maximize his ammunition, it got you to, like, maybe 40. So he's going to have significantly more ammo and feel much more like a durable artillery piece. Also, his Nurgling Infestation ability has been doubled. So instead of healing 0.1% of health per second, it now heals 0.2% of health per second, which is great. I mean, that's just going to make Nurglings much more durable as long as they're around him. Meanwhile, in multiplayer with Nurgle, they're just trying to reduce the cost on everything to see if that fixes anything. So the multiplayer cost for all of them have been reduced by roughly 100, 50 for Plague Bearers and 150 for Exalted Plague Bearers, just to try and make taking those units more exciting. Slaanesh has not received any changes. However, I do want to note that there has been a lot of fixes to impact damage, which we talked about earlier. Remember that bug we talked about, where when you would charge a unit, the defending unit would get the attacker's mass? That is what was wrong with the chariots. That was the chariot bug. Is that when the chariots would slam into an infantry unit, the infantry unit was being given the chariot's mass to calculate damage, so they weren't doing anything. That has been fixed, so all of the chariots in the game should be vastly performing much, much healthier, and that, of course, includes Slaanesh. So, and other than that, there are no changes. For Khorne, there's no multiplayer changes, but they did do a change for single player, which is the dogfighting technology in Scorn's skill tree now adds Strider to Fleshhounds in addition to its other bonuses. So it used to, I think, just increase their charge bonus. Now it also gives them Strider, and Strider is an incredibly sexy ability. Like, Strider is always really, really nice. So that's a good change. Moving on to purely multiplayer changes. The biggest thing that they've actually done a couple of really, really big things, and we're going to go ahead and look at them. First, they've added 2 new maps to make Domination Mode a little bit more exciting and have some more variety. You can now fight at Arnheim, which is the High Elf city on the coast of southern Nagaroth, which is a really, really cool kind of coastal map. And then they added the Battle for Itza from the Hunter and the Beast expansion for Warhammer 2. So we've gotten now a High Elf theme mapped and a Lizardman theme mapped, which is great. That's just going to add some really nice, fun variety to Domination and just give you more options to choose. Furthermore, the starting funds for the armies has been changed rather drastically. So instead of it being 40% of your army's funds goes to your starting army and 60% goes to your reinforcements, it's now a even 50-50 split, which I think is great. Another thing they've done is that if you are falling behind in a domination match, you now have a very straightforward, reliable buff to try and help you get caught up, which is that if you are behind by at least 1,000 victory points, you get 5 supplies additional per second. And if you are behind by 2,000 or more victory tickets, you get 10 supplies additional per second. Furthermore, the way supplies are generated is vastly different. So first, when you just jump into a map, you get 500 bonus starting supplies compared to the original. So compared from last build to this build, you now have 500 more supplies to work with as soon as the fight starts. In addition, your base income supply of supplies has been increased by 4. So now you get 20 supplies per second instead of 16 supplies per second, which is great. And then, of course, that would go to 25 if you're behind by 1,000, and then 30 per second if you're behind by 2,000. And then they have removed the supply income provided by dealing damage, which I think is a huge change and a great change to domination mode. So it used to be that the amount of damage you would deal to the enemy would generate you additional supplies, but it was kind of a bad system because it would snowball, right? If you were someone that was dealing a lot of damage, you were not only killing your opponent faster than he was killing you, but you were then also generating more supplies than he was by dealing damage, therefore allowing you to summon more units quicker. So it was just kind of a silly system. Like that's fine in the Demon Prince battles, like the Demon Prince battles, survival battles, that's what they're called. That, you know, that's fine that you get supplies based on the damage you deal because you're fighting the AI, and the AI also has technically unlimited resources. Whereas in player versus player, I think that's a good change. And then last, some general fixes. They have fixed some bug problems that had to do with some Slanesh stuff. They have fixed an issue with Bellacor's Blade of Shadow ability in custom and multiplayer battles. Ranked battles can no longer... People found a way to cheese in using the Demons of Chaos that is no longer allowed. And they've also disabled the manual targeting on siege weapons on everything, but particularly siege weapons in multiplayer, because people found out that you could exploit that system to make like iron blasters fire twice as fast. So that is no longer possible. People were cheating, so those cheats have been fixed. Last thing that's worth talking about is they do have a section here called known issues, where they're just basically saying just something to watch out for is that they say do not put your character on top of the final quest marker on the Forge of Souls island. Do not do that. If you do not put them on the quest marker unless you are moving onto the quest marker in order to finish the campaign. Do not stand on top of it or too close to it by any means, because it will cause a soft lock. Basically, what you have to do is you have to make sure that the AI does not move onto that circle, because if you do, the game will think that the AI has won. Even if you beat the AI, the game will soft lock because it will think the AI has somehow won and lost simultaneously. So don't do that. Anyway, that's going to be the end of the patch notes. The last thing to talk about is that this is, of course, the first major update for Total War Warhammer 3. They want to note to everyone that the DLC features that we're all looking forward to, such as the Blood Pack, Immortal Empires, and something known as Redacted, is being worked on and will be coming in the future. And then they are also working on ongoing fixes, such as fixes to siege battles, auto-resolve, unit movement, and synchronization animations for units fighting each other, and balance changes. Those are all still being worked on in the future. So, this is a great change. I think this is a very, very healthy set of patch notes. I think this will hopefully allow pretty much everybody to return to the game and really start enjoying themselves, unless you're just a diehard fan of Immortal Empires, or like you just don't like any of the new races and you're waiting for your favorite race, or you just need the Blood Pack to survive. All of which are understandable positions. In which case, we will see you in the future. But please do let me know down in the comment section below. Let me know, if this is going to bring you back. Like, is there a fix in this? You're like, finally, I can come back and enjoy playing this game. Are you still waiting for something? Is there something that you're like, this is cool, but I'm waiting for X? Let me know what X is. But let me know what y'all think of the patch, and I will probably see you guys soon. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Bye.